It was a bright and warm day, the kind that should have felt safe and serene. Emily, a volunteer with a rescue team in Asheville, North Carolina, was called to the woods after hikers reported hearing strange screams. The sound wasn't what anyone expected. They initially thought it was an injured coyote, but what they found was something far more heartbreaking. In the woods, under the dappled sunlight, lay a 5-month-old German Shepherd puppy, who had been lying across a tiny fawn in a protective manner. The puppy's body was covered in cuts and abrasions, and one of his paws was swollen and bleeding. His ribs were visible beneath matted fur, and despite his injuries, he was growling low at anyone who tried to get too close, his protective instincts in full force. The fawn, entangled in a twisted, half-buried fence, was barely breathing. Her tiny legs were scraped raw, and she couldn't even stand. The puppy had stayed by her side, refusing to leave, even though he was in pain. His eyes were full of defiance and something deeper, something that Emily couldn't understand at first. But as she approached, it became clear, this wasn't just an animal trying to survive. This was a puppy who had made a choice to protect, to stay with a dying creature, and to risk his own life for her. Blood stained the leaves around them, tufts of fur were caught in the thorns, and the air smelled of desperation. The sight was heart-wrenching. Emily crouched down slowly, showing her palms to the puppy, trying to reassure him. He snarled once more, his body trembling, but instead of attacking, he turned and gently licked the fawn's ear. It was an act of tenderness amidst the chaos. Emily realized this was no ordinary dog. This was a creature capable of selfless devotion, one who had chosen to stay, to suffer, and to wait. After the wildlife team arrived and started taking care of the fawn, Emily focused her attention on the puppy, whom she had now named Ranger. He had been through more than anyone could imagine. His swollen paw, the cuts, the scars beneath his fur, all told a story of neglect, abandonment, and survival. His defensive behavior was a sign that he had been through trauma before. As Emily tried to get closer, she saw that he flinched at the sight of gloves, and when she tried to put a leash on him, he backed away, but he didn't run. It was clear that he wasn't trusting anyone, but at the same time, he wasn't afraid. It didn't take long for Emily to notice the signs of abuse. The collar he wore had been ripped off, and under his front leg, she could see a patch of raw skin, likely from the collar rubbing against him as he was abandoned in the wild. Ranger had been left to fend for himself. But despite the way he had been treated, he stayed with the fawn. He made a decision that day in the woods, to protect her, to keep her alive long enough for help to come. Emily whispered softly, asking, "What happened to you, sweetheart? Who left you here?" He didn't answer, of course, but stared past her, his eyes still locked on the stretcher carrying the fawn, now named Willow. Ranger wasn't ready to let go. Despite being exhausted and injured, he followed Willow as she was carried to the wildlife rescue vehicle. His limp was slow but determined. His swollen paw dragged slightly, but his will to stay with her was stronger than the pain. Emily spoke to the wildlife officer, insisting that Ranger be allowed to stay with them, just for now. The officer hesitated, but after a moment, nodded and said, "Fine, but he's your responsibility." Emily didn't even hesitate as she responded, "He already is." And just like that, Ranger was brought home, but Emily had no idea how much this decision would change her life, and her family's, in ways she never expected. That night, Ranger didn't sleep. He paced the living room, his body tense, his ears flicking at every noise. It was as if he was still listening for something out there in the woods. Emily watched him closely, her heart aching for him. She knew this wasn't just an ordinary case of adjusting to a new environment. Ranger wasn't just a puppy who had been abandoned. He was a puppy who had been forced to survive alone, a puppy who had witnessed and experienced trauma that left scars deeper than just his physical injuries. Despite her best efforts to comfort him, Ranger didn't eat. He ignored the blanket she laid out for him and the food she put in front of him. Instead, he curled up near the door, his body coiled tightly, nose pressed against the bottom edge, as if guarding it, waiting for something. Emily sat on the steps, watching him, and realized that this puppy wasn't just struggling with physical pain. He was carrying emotional trauma, too. His quiet, steady presence spoke volumes about the kind of life he had lived, one filled with abandonment and hardship. Over the next few days, Emily and her son, Caleb, worked to gently coax Ranger into feeling at home. But it wasn't easy. Ranger still wouldn't let anyone get too close. When Caleb came downstairs, Ranger stiffened, studying him carefully for a long time before lowering his head and walking away. He was uncertain, unsure whether to trust again. But as time passed, something changed. Ranger began following Caleb from room to room. He wasn't demanding attention, but he was there, quietly offering his presence, his steady gaze a comfort to the boy. Ranger was learning to trust again, but it would take time. Emily could see the sadness in his eyes, the deep, lingering grief of a puppy who had been through too much. He had been abandoned, left to fend for himself, and had witnessed the painful suffering of the fawn. He wasn't sure who he could trust anymore, but little by little, he started to let down his guard. He began to let Caleb pet him, and eventually, Ranger even let Emily touch him without pulling away. Days passed, and Ranger started to heal. Emily received a call from the wildlife center. Willow, the fawn, had survived the night. She was standing, drinking water, and starting to recover from her injuries. Emily played a video of Willow's progress for Ranger, and though he didn't react at first, his eyes softened as he watched. He seemed to understand that the fawn he had risked everything for was going to be okay. The healing process for Ranger was far from over, though. He still struggled with his past, and the emotional scars ran deep. Emily took him back to the wildlife center, hoping that the visit would help bring some closure. Willow was still weak, but she was alive. Ranger didn't rush forward to greet her, but he sat quietly at the fence, watching her with a calm, steady gaze. There was no frantic rush, no barking, just a quiet acknowledgement that Willow was going to be okay. Emily realized that Ranger wasn't just a protector. He was a soul that had learned what it meant to love and let go. Weeks passed, and Ranger's healing journey continued. His behavior began to change. He no longer paced the house anxiously or cried out in the night. He began to eat more regularly, and Emily noticed that he was becoming more comfortable in his new home. He wasn't the same broken puppy who had been found in the woods. He was a dog who had experienced love and sacrifice, and now he was learning what it meant to truly heal. One day, Emily took Ranger to the same clearing in the woods where they had first found him. He walked there slowly, with purpose, nose to the ground. They reached the same twisted metal fence, now covered in vines and overgrown with grass. Ranger sat down at the spot where he had once chosen to stay with the fawn, where he had bled for her and protected her. He lowered his head, his eyes soft but full of memories. As Emily watched, she realized that Ranger had let go. He wasn't lost anymore. He was finding his own way, and so was she. He wasn't just surviving. He was learning to live, to love, and to let go when it was time. Back home, the house felt different. Ranger was calmer, more present, no longer haunted by his past. He began to walk with Emily, to join Caleb on the porch, and to show the family that healing was possible, even for the most broken souls. In the end, Ranger had not just saved the fawn, he had saved them all. He had taught them the true meaning of love, sacrifice, and the strength it takes to let go. His journey wasn't just about surviving, it was about living fully and embracing the love and trust that came with being part of a family.